Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We're engaging with the words of Torah from Parshat Shoftim this morning. You'll recall that last week we were in Parshat Re'eh, and now we're going to get to setting up the system of government that was going to happen in the land of Israel when they crossed the Jordan and settled there. Presumably the kind of government, according to the narration, the kind of government that they had in the desert as a military campaign was not going to work, right, in the land where they were going to settle and actually build a society. But when is this in reality written?
Much later.
Thank you, Bert.
386 or something?
You said 400 years.
Much later. So they've been in the land for quite some time, right? This is a religious reform. Deuteronomy is a religious reform. And so we are getting now the description of what a government should be, what the ideal in the land of Israel should be from the point of view of the Deuteronomist. And we have four categories of leadership in the ancient Israelite system. So we have a balance of powers, if you will. So tell me what the four branches are. What kinds of government do we have? We're going to see right now that we're going to get judges. What else? Prophets. So priests and Levites, right? So we're going to call it, as they do in biblical scholarship, clergy.
And the king.
And the king.
I'm impressed.
So these are the different branches of leadership in ancient Israel. You have judges. Tell me a little bit about why judges have been important in the history of Israel. Till now. Not now, but till now. Wars. Right? So you have a loose confederation of tribes. There comes a threat that's bigger than what you can handle. You gather together with other tribes to defend, let's say, the coast. And so you have a leader that arises who is wise, who is a military leader, and this person is the judge, right? So the book of Judges, right, is all about this period, which is early in Israelites' history, in Israel's history. So judges have been the leaders. So when we say judges, it's not like, oh, okay, somebody who's going to go to law school, right, and sit on the bench. Judges were the real leaders of the people, until the people ask for a king. So possibly it is that, once again, you can't get the people united unless you have the symbol, the person who has both the military capability and power, right, and other kinds of power to really unite the people. So I'm doing all of this on purpose before we get to the text. So who was the first? We've already had the clergy. We've had the Levites and the priests, right? Since our discussion of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle in the desert, right? And who's the prophet that we're most familiar with so far in reading Torah?
Moses?
Moses would be very bummed to hear Elijah. Moses is our prophet, right? Moses is the Hanavi. He is the prophet.
Amy, what happened to Caleb and Joshua? Do they play any role now in this?
They don't play a role in this system.
Do they just disappear after?
Well, we have the book of Joshua, right? He continues to be the military leader, but it's before the settlement of the land, right? So this is for when they're settled and when they have a society. Okay, so
is that a big timeline difference? Do you think
between
where they are now, the settlement, and when they came in the land? In other words, did it just migrate to this, and Caleb just disappears sort of in relevance?
All right, so remember Torah history and lived history. So if you're talking Torah history, it's sometime after. If we're talking lived history, there was no invasion, right? It develops from within the Canaanite system. All right, so judges. So we have a judge who is the one who appoints the first king. So we have Samuel, and Samuel appoints Saul as the first king of Israel. How long does Saul reign? 2 years. Saul is a military leader, right? And there are some theories that this is actually why the kingship develops. There's a big push. There's a very big threat from the Phoenicians, from the sea peoples. It threatens the coast so badly that they decide they have to become a monarchy. That it's just too big a national threat. That the judges aren't going to be able to, pull it off. A judge isn't going to pull it off. The confederation of tribes isn't going to be able to come together and really pull it off, that they're going to have a king. That's one theory. Another theory is that they are moving from being semi-nomadic pastoralists to becoming agrarian. Right? If you're going to have an inhospitable land, you've got steep hills, you have to steep them. Right? You have to put, or how do you say that word? S-T-E-P-P. You terrace them. So you have to terrace the land, right? So there's a lot of work that goes into terracing and defending, right, what you've now terraced in order to feed a bunch of people if you're talking inland. So
Rabbi, I think some people wanted a king because, like everybody else, has a king.
It's not usually why nations do things that are this big a change, is because everyone else is doing it. The part of that might be true is it seems to be effective for everybody else. The other kingdoms around Israel indeed had kings, and perhaps Israel sees that they are successful and secure, and so they decide, well, that's the way we can be best successful and secure, is also to have a king.
It's also a uniting, thousands of years later we have a constitution, and because, in fact, some people even talked about having a king in the very beginning when they were, developing the constitution. But in general, for thousands of years, the way to make a country was to have a king.
Sure. And this is a constitutional monarchy, right? This is a constitutional monarchy. And many people believe that Europe looked to this model. That the king, because in the ancient Near East, where does the law originate in the ancient Near East?
Persia?
Who gives the law in the ancient Near East? The king.
Or
the king is in contact with the gods, but the king gives the laws. This is an exception. Ancient Israel is an exception to that, right? It is the exception in the ancients. It reconstructed that idea. And in Israelite monarchy, the king is bound by the Constitution. The king is bound by this set of rules. And where does this set of rules come from in ancient Israel? God, not the king. That is a new concept in the ancient world. That it is the one God who gives the law. And to whom did the one God give the law?
Moses.
The people.
The people. This is big. Do you understand how big this is? If before I'm the king, I'm in contact with the gods, I then adjudicate and I make the law, that's a very different role for king. Then even, let's say, the gods make the laws and give them to me, right? It's still exclusively through me. In Israel, in ancient Israel, it was a theophany before the entire people. They were all at Sinai. Everyone heard at Sinai, Anochi Adonai Elohecha. Right? This is radically different. And what it does for the role of king is interesting because over and against the king is the prophet. Because the prophet, presumably, is hanging out with God. So do you see, you can imagine the tension between these two roles, right?
But at the time, at the time you're talking about 400 years later, right? So there is no prophet, and the people are doubting now. So wouldn't they need something?
We have lots of prophets. We have lots of prophets. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm.
No worries. We have lots of them. So there's.
Aren't they there to keep the king kind of honest?
So.
Kind of like the media today.
So this is where we're going to go eventually, right? If this is a constitutional monarchy, who plays what role? So I think to some extent, Bert's right that's how it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. That there's a body that says, here are our values, here are our supreme values. Is that what the most powerful elements of government are living into or not?
Speaking truth to power.
Speaking truth to power. So when David has Bathsheba's husband killed on the front line so he can take her for his own, it's the prophet, right, Natan, who comes and says, if a farmer had one sheep and you, the king, came and took, or a rich guy came and took that sheep, would that be fair? Well, of course not, David says, right? And the prophet Nathan says, well, hello.
Probably the only example we can still see of a king or a monarch being the head, at least figuratively, for unity is in Britain. They still look to the Queen as the figure of unity, but they have the Parliament underneath the two houses who are balancing, and they also have the press to keep them in order. And it's ironic that now we look to Britain and we rebelled against that order, and now we have a president who wants to be king again. Without prophets, without press, he wants to be a dictator, not a king.
So that's a very interesting place that we could wind up.
We are there.
So let's look at the text. Let's look at chapter 16, verse 18.
You shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall allow no partiality. You shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. Justice, justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not set up a sacred post, any kind of pole, beside the altar of the Lord your God that you may make, or erect a stone pillar, for such the Lord your God detests.
Okay. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol sha'arecha. So you will appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that Adonai your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. Mishpat tzedek. Due justice is lukewarm at best. Mishpat, judgment. Tzedek, righteous, just. So, I mean, it sounds a little bit redundant, but your judgment shall be righteous.
Well, doesn't one speak to like the law and the other speaks more to values?
No.
Tzedek?
No.
No?
No such distinction.
At all?
No, at all. There is no difference. The law is just, right? The law is expressive of those values. And, I mean, does one mean a noun like the law and one means the kind of law? I mean,
guess
that's sort of what
English,
it says.
In English, there's compassion and there's strict justice, and they're kind of not always the same.
I heard Al Franken say that your politics reflect your morals.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what Torah feels, for sure. So mishpat tzedek, your rulings shall be just and righteous rulings. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall take no bribe. Probably this does not mean bribes. Probably this means fees. Right? because obviously bribes, bribes is a little too obvious, right? It's like, duh, right? Bribes are going to blind the eye. But you could just say we're charging an administrative fee to hear your case, Maura Tenzer. But George Walken doesn't have the fee, right? So Maura's case will be heard, and you'll get quicker justice, and probably, right, what Torah is suggesting is that will influence also the judge that you had the money to pay to bring a case to
What did the
court.
gangsters call it when they went around collecting from protection money? Yeah, that was the fee.
So this would be a fee to have the Hebrew shochad means literally, it refers to a gift for which something is expected in return.
Was the king then only appointed because of the military need?
We're gonna get to the king. We're at the judges right now. So the judge judging as its own thing was probably, this is a somewhat new idea, right? As we talked about, judging had not been separate from other aspects of leadership before. Now we're getting a judiciary that is really about adjudicating cases rather than the judge is not going to take on other aspects of leadership.
So it's an organized balance of government, of everybody having a role for balance.
That is what we're looking at.
But didn't the judges sort of arise out of a popular? They had to have a certain status within the community. They weren't elected or nominated or anything of that sort. It was almost as if they were special prophets. They were recognized as important leaders, almost organically from the community.
So yes. So my notes say it is possible that when a village chief was chosen from among the leading elders, he became the judge.
And so weren't they leaders
Just-
of the tribes?
Leaders of the tribes.
So within the tribes there would have been leadership, right? But there was also leading elders, right? And from the leading elders comes the judge, just as a sheikh is chosen in traditional Arab society. So it would have been understood that this is your guy.
Is that what a sheikh is? A judge? Is that what
Sure.
it means?
No, it means a lot more than that. But think Avraham.
Uh-huh.
Avraham was a sheikh. So you have wealth, you control what's happening to everybody who's in your...
It's a pinnacle position then.
Yes. And then that means, by definition, you have the right, if there's a dispute among two of those people, you have the right to say what's going to happen. They come to you as the sheikh to render judgment.
But Samuel was more than just somebody who judged. Samuel was considered very righteous, he had a lot of popular support for his
Absolutely. Which is how Saul gets his authority. Right? Okay. What authority he had. All right, where are we? 20. The very famous. Yes? Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. L'ma'an tichyeh. Justice. Justice shall you pursue in order that you live. Not just thrive, right? That you should live and then thrive in this land that God is giving to you. Why tzedek, tzedek? You know this is an invitation for the rabbis. Come on.
Well, it's repeated to give real emphasis to it.
Okay, emphasis. What else? Any guesses? Come on, you know how the rabbis think by now.
What's the difference between Hazak and Tzedek?
Chazak means strong.
Okay.
Tzedek means just.
Okay.
Very.
Go out of your
More
way.
than emphasis, what?
Go out of your way to do the right thing.
All right, so go out of your way. Not just tzedek when it's comfortable, but tzedek when you have to work really hard
Choice.
to achieve it.
The note here says justice and only justice.
Justice and only justice shall you pursue. Right? The rabbis, they love this. Tzedek, tzedek. God wouldn't be redundant, God forbid, right? So, tzedek, not only the ends, but the means must be just.
So that's the statement that ends do not justify the means.
Correct. For the rabbis, tzedek, tzedek. Both the means for tzedek and the ends must be tzedek. Another one for them is it's tzedek for me, but tzedek for everyone as well. That I need to protect, like my justice in my own sense, but also justice for the community, right? Because sometimes those are in tension.
Can you talk about the word tirdof? It's translated in English as pursuit. Doesn't it have a sense of running after?
That's what pursuit is, right? So if you pursue prey, it's exactly the same word.
Right, but pursue also has a much more calm meaning in English. Like you shall do this. It's not like actively.
So this is like pursuing prey.
Like running after. This
is like you're running after something that's running from you. And
so you don't pursue that cab.
So it's
a very in this context very active.
Very active, absolutely. And it would have been evocative of hunting. Mm-hmm. Right? For the people reading this text, it would have absolutely been evocative of hunting. That you're chasing after something that's running really fast from you. And
that's different from just that you should do it.
Correct. So we get 2 times tirdof, famously in the Bible. We get this one, tzedek tirdof, and we get that Aharon was ohev shalom v'rod fehu, and chased after it. This same word. So when we were in Israel and we heard from Tal Becker, this wonderful scholar that those of you who did Hartman with me saw on the discussion part of the film, he talked to us and he said, we were talking to him about the matzav, right? So that's what you talk about in Israel, the situation. And if you read my article in the Jewish Journal, he's the one who said, the Torah talks about both justice and peace as things that we rodef after, not things we achieve. And he said that's a very important Jewish mindset, that it is hubris to think we will achieve justice, right? Because that says, I know what justice is, I understand justice, I will make it happen. That it is a much more humble thing to say, like, I will stay in pursuit of justice, and I will stay in pursuit of peace. That it's not, Tal Becker right now is talking very much that he's troubled and very worried by the zero-sum game way of thinking about things in the Middle East. That for me to win, you have to lose. For you to win, I have to lose. And that's very much the mindset when Israelis and Palestinians come to the table. He's been part of the negotiations from the beginning. He's very high up in the negotiations. The ones that have happened. They haven't happened in a while.
Even now, he's still high up?
Yes. Yes. If there were negotiations tomorrow, he would be called in. Or certainly consult. I mean, he's the guy. So he was saying he's very troubled by zero-sum game thinking. And that this is what stops so much of the negotiations. Is if it's perceived of as a win for you, it must mean somehow that that's a loss for me. So when you want something to go through, you protest. No way, Israel will never settle for that, not going to happen, ever, 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 then it might happen. Because it looks like, right, it's a loss.
And Abbas stated on the radio yesterday, if you continue with settlements, there is no peace. Period. That's
so what was important for me to hear from Dr. Becker is we too often tend to think in zero-sum game terms and or as Americans in achievement terms. When will peace be achieved? Right? When will justice be achieved? And he says that's just not how they think. That the way to think about this is the way Torah talks about it, which is to pursue it actively, very vociferously all the days of your life. And that's what the society should be concerned with, is pursuing justice and pursuing peace. That it's not going to be an absolute state. And if we can go there and live from that place, then there's always hope. Because there can be more peace or less peace. And I can always work for there being more peace. But if the thing is going to be, there's going to be peace or not, it leaves us in a really hopeless situation, and it doesn't move anything forward at all. So I'm learning from him, and I'm going to be very disciplined about every time I go there to challenge that thinking and to say more peace or less peace, which will this particular thing help create?
Even though it's peaceful, you still have to work for it because you have to keep it going. You have to always work for it. It's not like, okay, now I can settle back and it's peaceful and I don't have to do
That's
anything.
absolutely right. That's absolutely true. That it stays active. Even should we achieve Halavai, it should only come in our day. Even if peace between the Israelis and Palestinians should be achieved, it's still something that has to be very carefully tended and worked for, because otherwise we know what happens, right? It easily comes apart. And justice as well, right? That we have to continually work for it in so many ways, even if we think we have a just society, which we don't. Right? That's something that has to be worked for really hard. It's an excellent point.
But peace means giving up something in this situation.
In every situation.
In every situation, but just talking about this situation. And so you don't get the feeling, at least from what you read here, that the government is pursuing peace, is running after it, because they're not willing to give up they're not willing to give up anything, it sounds as if. And so it's not really being followed.
So that's part of the question that we asked him is, so what does it mean to pursue peace when there's no active, conversation about it? And he said, there's lots of ways that people are doing that have nothing to do with the government, because the governments aren't ready. There's no leadership on either side ready to come to the table to figure out what would we be willing to give up. I mean, everybody says what they're willing to give up. Everybody said, we went to meet with the Palestinians, with Erekat, the highest Palestinian negotiator there is. And he said it's very clear. Here's what we'll give up if Israel will give. Right. So everyone says they're clear about what they'll give up, but there's no leadership on either side to get to that place. And so what he's saying is that there are people who are actively pursuing things on the ground, relationships on the ground. Things on the ground that when there are governments ready to come to get leadership on either side to come together to make some of these agreements happen, there will be a big network under them to support those efforts, because it's going to take continuing efforts to make sure the peace deal doesn't fall apart. And that if there are good relations and if there's, back and forth and Israelis and Arab kids learning together and learning each other's language and things like that happening, raising the poverty level for the Arab community, educating women in the Arab community. If that continues, then there's a stronger network in place to support that peace that gets agreed to.
Isn't that how justice is stitched into, the two things you're after, peace and justice? Justice is stitched into that.
I would say for sure. For sure. Margot?
I'm thinking that might a better word than pursue, which leaves winners and losers, be earn. Is there a word for earn in the Hebrew language?
Earn?
Earn by both sides. Well, I'm just thinking, and I'm kind of
but
both sides work together.
Earn suggests it's going to be given by someone else. I'll earn it, but someone else is going to give it to me. Pursue means you have to run after it and go get it.
It is after all the journey that's important that gets you to wherever you want to go.
Or in the right
Spoken like a Jew.
Isn't this
Spoken like a Jew, Linda Scheibel.
Another example that perfection is an enemy of the good. And I know what perfection is for the Hamas, which is the destruction of Israel. I don't know what perfection is for Israel. So, but when the perfection itself prevents the good for the negotiations for Hamas.
So if you set something here and say, I'm not going to budge from here, because it has to be the perfect deal, right, then of course there's no room to negotiate. Right, absolutely.
Rabbi, the commentary here adds another explanation for the repetition of the word justice. I'll read this this verse expresses a recurrent theme in Deuteronomy that the failure to follow God's instructions will result in the loss of the promised land. Now that's pretty serious.
That is very serious. Right? The consequences are very serious. Right? And that's hinted at in Lama'an Tichyeh V'yarashta et haaretz, right? In order that you shall live and you shall inherit the land that God is giving you. Meaning, you're not going to do that if you don't pursue justice. Right? That's the consequences are you won't live and inherit the land. What happens? What happens if you don't obey God's law and you're in the land? What happens? Spits you out. You get conquered.
Doesn't this sort of remind you of Rabbi Tarpon's statement about you're not required to complete the task, but neither you're permitted to desist?
It's very Jewish. Yep. Yeah. You can't say, well, since I can't complete it, then there's nothing I can do. Absolutely. It's very Jewish.
But also the promised land, again, for me, the promised land is that internal land.
Well, that is a whole nother conversation. Right? And so many of our spiritual scholars understand. So if the promised land is a spiritual place that one is trying to get to, what are the judges sitting at the gates?
Your
conscience
and
so
the shoulds and
so the judge is the one who discerns, is this reality? Is this real, or is it my fear, my projection, my desire, my whatever, right? Is this about my ego? Or is this real? Right? The judge discerns, is this what I should do? Right? Or is this not, or should I not do this? And the Sefer Yetzirah talks about that there are 7 gates. So the judges sit in the gates of the town. The judges sit in the gates, and that's where they adjudicate. And the Sefer Yetzirah says that there are 7 gates in the body. 2 eyes, 2 ears, the mouth, and the 2 nostrils. Why are nostrils important? What happens when God's nostrils flare, what happens?
He gets mad. She gets mad.
Very bad things happen when God's nostrils flare. God's nostrils flaring is anger. Right? So when we have the high holidays and we say God is erech apayim, God is long of nose. Why is that a good quality?
It's not open.
God's not angry, and God has lots of reason to be angry, right? So God being long of nose, the nostrils are not flaring, even though there's plenty of reason, right, for that. So you'll read in your machzor, you'll see. You're going to look at high holidays, and you're going to be like, oh, do we have that in Torah study? It's going to say slow to anger in your translation, right? But it's long of nostril. All right, so there's 7 gates in the body, and over these gates we are to set, according to the Sefer Yetzirah, magistrates and officials. Shoftim v'shotrim, so that we will judge ourselves at all times, making sure that they will not commit any sin. If these places are kept whole, then it is possible always to remain holy and pure. So these judges we are to appoint over the gates of the body, over what we see, what we look at, what we listen to, right? And certainly dealing with our anger and our speech, what we
Chinese have a wonderful way of saying that too. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil.
And the Zohar picks it up also and says that there are gates and imaginings of the mind, and so putting judges and officers at the portals of the mind is about discerning the nature of thought, discerning the nature of what we think, because thoughts just come, right? Those of us who are going to sit in meditation in a little while, right? Thoughts just come. That's what they do. Judgments. I'm afraid. I'm jealous. I'm whatever. Like those things come up, and appointing a judge at the gate of the mind, right, is saying, okay, so let me evaluate what that thought is, not just react to that thought. Discernment, right? That the judge is known for discernment and carefully thinking about things and what's actually happening. So certainly the the spiritual tradition absolutely understands all of this as metaphor. And if that's true, you get to hold, Ms. Gorngut, you get to hold, then what are the others? Okay? Because absolutely they use this system. Throughout Kabbalah, throughout Jewish Musar teaching, Jewish, what's Musar in English? Ethical, moral behavior, cultivation, right? They have to turn to Torah, right? It's all here. It's all here in Torah, of course. God gave it all to us, right? So this remains the system. And so if we're talking the Promised Land as an internal state of being, of holiness and purity and goodness and peace, then we're talking about the judges. Next we're going to go, right, to the king. So you be thinking about that one. And I'll give you a copy of Rabbi Shefa Gold's teaching, where she walks through all 4 of them, don't worry. So you'll have it before you leave. All right. You shall not set up a sacred post at verse 21. What is the Hebrew? Lo tita lecha. Where's Rita Cohen? Rita Efros when I need her.
Asherah.
I know, Rita's not here for me to pick on her. Lo tita lecha.
Asherah.
Asherah.
That's the
What's Asherah?
Opposed to Asherah, to another god.
Right? Asherah. The goddess for the Canaanite people. Mm-hmm. She was the consort of the god, of the chief god. She is also Astarte. She has different names based upon where she's worshipped in the ancient Near East. So Asherah, Astarte, Ishtar, Isis, these are all, right, the female consort, the partner to the male god. We know that Asherah continued to be worshipped in Israel. There was never a time, I know this is going to depress Maura Tenzer really badly. There was never a time in ancient Israel where Israel was not worshiping Baal and Asherah. We have never found archaeological evidence ever of any period that did not contain evidence of Asherah. And right, so that's why the prophets are always yelling and screaming about it, is because the people just couldn't let it go. In Kuntilat Adrud in southern, I think it's northern Egypt, there is a inscription on a cave. It's a painting on a cave wall that says to Yahweh, to Yud-He Vav-He, and his Asherah. So what it tells you is that there was syncretistic worship, that in many places Yud-He Vav-He had a consort. Of course, you have to have a consort if you're the god, right? Right? You just have to. So, in lots of places they never gave up Asherah. So here we see in Deuteronomy the religious reform: do not set up an Asherah anywhere. It is abhorrent to Yud-He Vav-He. Not only is it not his partner, right? It's abhorrent to Yud-He Vav-He.
Is this true even in the Davidic era and Solomon? Did it continue throughout?
Oh, Solomon had, other images in the temple of other gods. It was public because of his wives.
Is this because, as you said before, a lot of what became Israelites were Canaanites who basically signed on to be Israelites?
And early Israel never got rid of the impulse to worship the creatress, right? The goddess precedes Yud-He Vav-He by a long time, right? The creatrix is first. Patriarchy comes later, and needing the one God to be male. So there are folks who never gave up their attachment to the idea of the feminine divine. They just they were like, wait, what? The world can come into being without a mother goddess to birth it? How could that possibly be? Right? And or just forget even logic. Just all of the the need to relate to the feminine divine. And so it stays. It doesn't go away. And so they may not have Asherah as a idol, God forbid, that would be pretty obvious. But a sign, a symbol of the goddess was always, if you had a grove of trees and there was a single tree, that was a sacred tree. So that was a tree sacred to the goddess. And it was often a cult site, right? It was one tree that kind of was apart. That was a sacred tree to the goddess. That is called an Asherah in lots of places. And notice, where is Abraham, right? When some pretty important stuff goes down for Abraham, he's at a tree that everybody knows about, right? Like, so you can hear earlier pagan resonances in a lot of these early Genesis narratives.
That's also in Africa too.
By the terebinth of Mamre, right? It was a very specific tree that he didn't have to say, which is over by the park, by the high school, right? It was like the terebinth of Mamre, like everyone knew what that was. It was a sacred tree.
Don't we still have trailings of this feminine goddess in our thinking as well?
Mother Earth.
Well,
Mother Earth, yes, but we
Shekhinah?
also...
Shekhinah is the most obvious.
Right.
That's the rabbinic.
The soul.
For what was important for the rabbis is that is an aspect of God. God contains both masculine and feminine. That was very important for the rabbis. So Shekhinah is not separate or different from Yud He Vav He.
It's a part.
But if we make love on Shabbos, we bring together, right, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One, with the Shekhinah, and cause a union in the high places, right? So there's resonances certainly of the duality of masculine and feminine, even within the tradition.
Well, I get the point about masculinity and femininity both, but I thought the key point about avoiding idols and all the other fundamental prescriptions we have is not to anthropomorphize,
Pomorphize
God, basically, because in which case God is neither masculine nor feminine.
So,
and be real. I understand that the priesthood, whatever, went in a patriarchal direction, but I thought sort of the fundamental rule was not human-like.
It's a fundamental rule.
The fundamental rule.
It's one of the concerns. That's not the only concern.
Okay.
Asherah is another concern. That's a big concern. That this non-anthropomorphic spirit energy does not have a female consort. Right? So part of it is not anthropomorphizing. The other is there's not a feminine spirit, right, that has anything to do with that. So part of it's about the unity of that deity. Part of it is about not anthropomorphizing. Part of it is it's not Baal. It's the same God, it's just not Baal, right? So the same kind of God. If you look early in our text, it's very anthropomorphic. God is walking around the garden in the afternoon. God is Ish Milchama, right? A man of war. There's a lot of anthropomorphizing that's still there, and certainly there's a big push against it. But that's not I wouldn't say it's even the biggest concern.
So you think the biggest concern really was dealing with Baal and Asherah?
Yeah. Polytheism, yeah. And Canaanite attachments to their gods. It's kind of, to me, it's kind of like the Christmas tree. Like, what do we really care that people have? They cut down a tree and they put it in their living room in December. Like, what do we really care? We don't really care. Okay, you have a tree and you put a bunch of crap on it, fine. Like, what's the big deal? We get all worked up about, do they have a tree in their house? Because it's a symbol of attachment to another tradition, even if it's a Hanukkah bush. It makes us really nervous. Why? And it makes me nervous. I'm not gonna lie. It makes me Hanukkah bush. I'm just like, just do a Christmas tree. Like, Hanukkah bush, really? And I don't mean to be judgmental. I'm just saying, it's my reaction, but I'm very clear my reaction is about Christmas and Jesus and Christ and the way it's been an imperial religion and has persecuted the Jewish people. And right, it goes, there's this crazy list that goes all the way back that has nothing to do with the tree. And that's what and I think it's the attachments to, right? The Christmas tree is about the attachments to that. It's not about what the people in that house are actually doing. Like, I know the people in that house are not practicing
Christianity,
taking the Eucharist, right? That's not my reaction. My reaction is to the associations of attachment, and that's what this is.
Or a statue of Robert E. Lee.
Exactly right, that we talked about last week, right? So this is the poll. So when you read English, I just want you, as always, to read. We read, don't put up a poll, okay, whatever, right? Like, This is deep stuff here. This is this was the important stuff. Asherah, don't put a tree in the living room in December, is what this is saying. Even if you think of it as a Hanukkah bush, you can't do it, right? It's too risky. It's just too close to the original. So even if they were just putting up a pole, because that's what you're supposed to do, because that's what our grandparents did, right? The Deuteronomist is saying, even if you don't mean it to be an Asherah, you can't do it. It's too close. Right? It's a slippery slope from a pole to the goddess. I'm just saying. All right.
There's no relationship between Asherah and Lashon Hara?
No.
Okay. They sound so much alike.
Yeah. No.
I'm sorry, what is Lashon Hara?
The evil tongue.
The evil tongue.
Gossip. Right, because if you're only dealing with Hebrew how it sounds, there's lots that's confusing. Right? If you know Hebrew visually, there's no connection. Right? They're just completely
like Musar and Musaf. I mean, they sound so much alike, and Nikki's told me they're very different.
Correct. But in English, to see and the see, right? Somebody who's just dealing with English, from an oral perspective, it's like, wait, what? Do those things have something to do with it?
We need to learn Hebrew.
Yeah.
Did Christians take any of that and burn it into the Son of God?
Take any of what?
Oh, the female, male portion, whatever it is.
How about the Virgin Mary?
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Virgin Mary. Of course. Of course there has to be the goddess. Of course there has to be the feminine divine. Absolutely. But, Catholicism had the same problem as Israelite religion, which is, it has to be understood that it's not God that's separate from God. It has to be, right, within God.
So they make a trinity.
Well, the Trinity is different from Mary.
Yep.
Right? And Mary's not exactly divine, but certainly you see lots of places that had the goddess that now have the same rites and rituals that they used to lift the statue of the goddess, they now lift a statue of the Virgin Mary. Right? So that their pagan connection to the feminine divine gets transferred onto Mary.
Okay, that's where the Son of God, Jesus, comes in. They make this whole thing happen.
Well, Jesus is another story. But the tree, that tree in December, right from here. Right from pagans. Absolutely, it was the Asherah, and you did a festival with the pole, with the tree, right? So at solstice, and so absolutely that is right out of that. That's Christians reconstructing their pagan beloved rites and rituals and bringing them in and reconstructing them into being now symbols of their Christian faith.
Very clever.
Look, we're about to crown God as king, right? In a few, God help me, in a month, we're about to crown God as king, right? Where did we get that idea? Where did that idea come from? Crowning God as king in the fall.
Pagan, it's got to be.
Yeah. Babylonia, Mesopotamia. They crowned their God as king in the fall. So what does Israel do? They've been in exile in Babylonia. They come back from exile.
And they bring the custom.
What are they going to do? They are going to now crown the king in the fall. But they reconstruct that pagan ritual. That's what every human civilization does, right? We're no different. You take those pagan rituals, you reconstruct them. It is now a symbol of your Jewish faith. What does that reconstruction look like? We're not crowning an earthly king, God forbid, because the ruling force in our lives, of course, is God as Melech HaOlam, King of the universe. And so we go through this huge rite and ritual to make that happen in the fall, because it ain't anywhere in here. What does it say in here is going to happen?
Sukkot?
Yes, but on this day that we're going to crown God as king, what happens according to this? I'd like a few guesses. Right, the job security. That's exactly right. Yom Tru'ah.
Oh, we'll sound the horn.
You will sound the shofar. That's it. That's all. You will sound the shofar. And then 10 days later, you're going to have this big hoopla around atonement and forgiveness. But the first day is the sounding of the horn to let you know we're starting the month where the big day comes. That's it. Everything else is from Babylonia. Everything else is a reconstruction of another religion. And look, it works. And I'm not knocking it. I love that we can take something and reconstruct it and make it speak to us, right, in a completely different context. That's what makes me trustful that we can take this and reconstruct it for our time and continue to make it, right?
So how do Orthodox deal with this if they don't look at it as, as a story and how we've pulled in all these other things? This is supposed to come from God, and God wrote it.
Well, no, they know it comes from the rabbis.
Right.
They know the rabbis developed these rituals after the temple was destroyed. Right? We created rabbinic Judaism. The ultra-Orthodox even won't argue that the rabbis didn't create rabbinic Judaism. We created the prayer book. They know the rabbis wrote those prayers. Right? There's no argument about that. So are they going to say it came from Babylonia? No. But crowning God as king, that's a lovely thing to do. Why not? Let's write beautiful liturgy around that.
I find it ironic.
Wait. I have a hand over here.
Rabbi Kuhn came to our house yesterday.
Yeah.
And as he was leaving, he said, I'm just going to blow the shofar because it's the beginning days, 30 days prior to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So I'm blowing it to remind you to start preparing. That is the reason for doing it. To start preparing you to think of your sins, etc.
Yeah.
And that's how they rationalize it.
They're not rationalizing anything. They blow shofar in Elul in order to say Rosh Hashanah is coming. They're not rationalizing anything. Rosh Hashanah is the sounding of the shofar, and so
he did rationalize by saying the reason we do it.
That is the reason we do it.
Because we're thinking of our sins and our.
That is the reason we do it.
Yeah.
It's not a rationalization.
Oh, you don't think it's a rationalization?
No, that's the reconstruction. The original blowing of shofar, right? Who knows what the original blowing of shofar is? It's already in Torah. That's not Babylonian. That's in Torah. What the original was, we can debate forever. It doesn't tell us in the Torah, right? For us, the reconstruction that's the call to tshuva, right? And that's the meaning of it for us.
The king is coming with the horns. When kings move around, people go out in front.
Right, but why do that on the 1st of Tishrei? Because God's coming on Yom Kippur? Okay, that works. Whatever the original meaning, of course but it was also an alarm, right? The shofar was also how you called people together. If God forbid there was an emergency and you needed everybody to act, you blew the shofar. And so some people say, well, that's the real meaning. It wakes us up to say, Yom Kippur's coming, we better pay attention. And the king is coming, and you can read whatever you want. It doesn't tell us. We kind of have to get there ourselves. All right, I want to read a little bit about the king because I think it's a timely piece.
I just wanted to say that I find it ironic about the fluidity of all the religion that goes through. The Canaanites become Israelites. We were in Babylonia. We take Babylonian tradition into our sort of thing. So there's an immense amount of fluidity that we take as gospel, pardon the term. We take it as, the word, but there is an immense amount of fluidity.
And when we can recognize that, we have lots to talk about with other traditions who have done exactly the same thing, right? As long as we say, we get it, we did it, everybody does it, that's how religion works, that's how people's work, that's how societies and cultures work, then we have lots to talk about with lots of different folks going, oh, that's cool, so y'all took a pole and you made it a tree, and we took a this and we made it a, right? Cool.
Called evolving.
It's called evolving religious civilizations. All right, so let's go to, which is always a mouthful, let's go to 14.
What 14? 1714?
1714.
If after you have entered the land that the Lord your God has assigned to you and taken possession of it and settled in it, and you decide, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me, You shall be free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by the Lord your God. Be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. You must not set a foreigner over you, one who is not your kinsman. Moreover, he shall not keep any horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since the Lord has warned you, you must not go back that way again. And he shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess.
So, wait.
It doesn't say he couldn't have had it before.
Go on.
When he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Let it remain with him, and let him read in it all his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as these laws. Thus he will not act haughtily toward his fellows, or deviate from the instruction to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel.
So at verse 18, the commentaries that I've always heard argue with this translation. This is the JPS translation. And verse 18 says, V'haya kishichvato al kisei mamlachto, and it shall be that when he sits on his throne, probably meaning as soon as he takes the throne, v'chatav lo et mishneh haTorah, he shall write for himself Mishnah Torah from before the priests, meaning he will take an authorized copy, the ones that are before the priest, and v'chatav lo, and he shall write for himself. You could argue v'chatav lo means he shall have it written for him, but v'chatav is pretty much the simple form, and that's where most people go, is that he's commanded to write a Torah scroll. So that, that's a pretty intense undertaking, and actually it's probably not. There's an argument about whether or not it's a Torah scroll, because Mishnah HaTorah Hazot, this teaching, probably means this teaching, right, about the king. Right, these parts of Deuteronomy. But of course, is that going to satisfy the rabbis?
No.
For the rabbis, what does the king got to write? An entire Sefer Torah, right? But the teaching is, the idea is the same, that he is to be engaged. The king is to be engaged with the Constitution all the time, to remember that it's this that guides him, and this is the authority. Because for us, God is the authority, and the values and ethics that flow out of that, the moral behavior that flows out of that, that is what the king should be paying attention to all the time, because the temptation, right, it's lest he become haughty. Could you imagine that could happen? That he would act haughtily towards his fellow, right? Or deviate from ethical behavior, right?
But when that Gold Star father, Mr. Khan, said, "I've got a copy of the Constitution," he should have said, "And you write it."
and keep it with you, right? And read it and study it. And so we're going back to this whole business of not having a lot of wives, not having a lot of horses, not having a lot of wealth, right? All of these things are things that can corrupt a king. Because the king is in a position to be very tempted by corruption. So what happens if you're already wealthy? But I think it is a very important teaching for our time about what a king, the monarch, what that's supposed to mean, and the behavior that's expected from the king, and what that's supposed to look like. And this is not just for our time, but in its own time, this was something in the ancient Near East, that the king was not all powerful. Right? The king was subject to God's law. And who was that law given to? Everybody. It was given to everybody. So everybody knew the laws by which the king was supposed to be behaving. Everybody knew, right, what the teaching was about how it was that you're an ethical and moral and good, respectable person who was a tzaddik, right, a righteous person. And that's the standard to which the king was held.
And it was read in public.
This was read in public, for sure. And so, people definitely had had access to this. So I've given you Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. By the way, just quickly, I know we have to go. Saul reigned 2 years. Then who came?
David.
Right? He reigned a long time. Then who came?
Solomon.
Good. So David unites the monarchy. David pulls everybody together. He makes it a nation state, right? All that grooviness. He rules, fine, good, whatever. He makes his capital where? Jerusalem. He conquers the Jebusites and takes a non-tribal place to become his capital. So there's no attachment to that. It was the Jebusites still. Solomon becomes king, and what does Solomon immediately begin doing in order to make sure that he is recognized and Israel's recognized as wealthy and powerful? He starts building. He starts major building projects. A palace and a temple adjacent to the palace. That's what you do when you're the king. You build yourself a palace, and then you build yourself a temple near that palace to the big guy, whoever it is. Baal, whoever it is. Ra, right? And that was a huge building project, which meant taxation of the people, right? Solomon imports a bunch of stuff. A lot of horses, right? We know about Solomon's stables, right? A lot of horses. How many wives did he have? 1,000 wives. I think it was.
How do you keep track?
I think it was 700 wives and 300 concubines, but not to the details are not so important. So Solomon taxes the people for all of these building projects, has a lot of horses, has a ton of wives, and what winds up happening? Right. After him, it's a divided monarchy.
What happened to the oversight of Solomon? Where were the prophets?
So that is a big, and then there's a big fights after Solomon about who's going to inherit the throne. That's why they split, because you've got prophets and other folks saying, we want this one, and other folks saying, we want this one, and it becomes a disaster. But the point being, Torah doesn't seem to be wrong about the things that will corrupt a king and weaken a monarchy and weaken the people and weaken their support. The king was supposed to bring everybody together so that it's a mutual, right? So that it's I don't know what I'm saying. So it unites everybody so that the mission can go forward and you're going to succeed. But if you deviate from that, Torah says it's bad. And here we have exactly what happened in early Israel. We need to keep reminding ourselves the united monarchy of Israel and Judea lasted for a total of 100 years. 100 years. So it's very clear that Torah is dealing with reality. So I'm giving you, you have mindfulness and justice, which I think is a beautiful piece by Rabbi Yael Shai that I very much encourage you to look at and to read about how we go about tzedek, how we go about justice. I know we don't have time to walk through it. And looking at this piece by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, just go to your second page, and I'll just skip to this. You can read, of course, the whole thing at home. Working off Rabbi Yochanan, who says, wherever you find the greatness of the Holy One, blessed be God, there you find God's humility. Right? So for the rabbis, right, it's about humility is divine, and so he says, in the context of the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II, there's a story worth telling. It happened in St. James Palace on 27 January 2005, the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Punctuality, said Louis XVIII of France, is the politeness of kings. Royalty arrives on time and leaves on time. So it is with the Queen, but not on this occasion. When the time came for her to leave, she stayed and stayed. One of her attendants said he had never known her to linger so long after her scheduled departure time. She was meeting with a group of Holocaust survivors. She gave each survivor, it was a large group, her focused, unhurried attention. She stood with each until they had finished telling their personal story. One after another, the survivors were coming to me in a kind of trance, saying, 60 years ago, I did not know whether I would be alive tomorrow, and here I am today, talking to the Queen. It brought a kind of blessed closure into deeply lacerated lives. 60 years earlier, they had been treated in Germany, Austria, Poland, in fact, most of Europe, as subhuman. Yet now the queen was treating them as if each were a visiting head of state. That was humility. Not holding yourself low, but holding others high. And where you find humility, there you find greatness. I think an important teaching for our time about power and about how one behaves with power.
And how to behave as a king.
And how to behave as a king. Exactly right.
Make it a queen instead.
So may we take the injunction, tzedek tirdov, seriously. May we figure out how it is that we can pursue justice. That's all we're asked to do, and it's a lot that we're asked to do. But we don't have to achieve it, but we must not cease or desist from pursuing it. Shabbat shalom.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.